Begin the current Daf Yomi, Eruvin Daf Chesba, which begin on the top of the oven, where the Gemara continues the discussion from the previous stuff regarding the parameters of a lechi, regarding a signpost that permits a mob in an alleyway to be able to carry in that area. She just corresponds because of the for any time Daf Chaim. Appreciate when joining us for today's Daf. Some of the things we're discussing in today's Daf are a classic machlokes Abai and Rav regarding lechi or me'elo. Regarding a lechi which just happens to be at the entrance of the mother. So like you can see this tree, which just happens to be there, but it functions as a signpost. Does that have the halachic status as a lechi or not? And then regarding lechitza sumiyallah, a natural partition not specifically made to enclose the area, is that also going to be considered valid or not? And then we discuss three halachas in the next mishnah for which living things, such as animals, are valid. Are they valid or are they not? Which lead to a discussion of what may be used for a get, including a living animal. Some of the key terms and concepts we discuss is in the final Mishnah is what's called paritz ka'imin, is a wall breached exactly 50% valid, which exactly it's not paritz move, it's not living room, it's exactly the same amount. Is that valid or not? The concept of shmishala aver is a dwelling that its primary utility is for the airspace beyond it. So that will actually have a different halachic status than a regular dira. A Eruvin Daf we've had in the previous Daf is if let's say a lechi you cannot see from the inside of the alleyway, you could see from the outside. The concept of goyel, which is the covering of the coffin, and isker shavai litzia, we compare the halacha of kedushin to that of gittin, to that of divorce. To begin the current Daf, Daf Tezvav Meral, Itma we learned. Continue on regarding different types of cases of lechi oimen me'elu. Regarding a signpost that's standing there by itself, it was not made to be there for the rectification of the alleyway. It wasn't prepared to be there. It just happens to be over there. So we have a machlekes Abai Yomi says have a lechi. It's going to be considered as a lechi, and Rabbi Allah have a lechi says it's not going to be a valid lechi. So the Gemara qualifies a machlekes as follows. Says, if you were not reliant on this lechi from before Shabbos, as Rashi says, let's say there was another lechi which fell down on Shabbos. So that means to say you weren't. Let's say you put a lechi over here. So on one side, and then you happen to have a tree over here. So you obviously were not relying on this tree from before Shabbos. Then no one's going to disagree in that case to level lechi. It's not going to consider that lechi. It's not only were you not made it for it to be a lechi, you weren't even relying on it to be a lechi from before Shabbos. Their whole machlekes was where you were relying on this from before Shabbos. That's where you have the machlekes. Abayam have a lechi says it's going to be a valid lechi. So but you rely on it. You had already in mind to use this as the signpost. Rav Amai says, lo lechi says not going to be a valid lechi. Why? He says, since initially you did not make it to be as a lechi. So lo lechi, it's not going to function as a lechi because you didn't make it to be as a lechi. Now, says the Gemara as follows, and this actually can take us through half of this amen. The assumption was, just like you have machlekes regarding a signpost, if you didn't make it for it just happens to be there, is that considered valid lechi or not? So too they disputed regarding a partition, a wall, which was also natural partition, not specifically to close the area. That they would also have the same machlekes if that's going to be considered valid lechi or not. Now, so therefore, Toshma, the Gemara attempts to bring many different rayas to this machlekes that we think is the same machlekes regarding if it's considered mechitza or not. And we have 4 proofs that it is a valid mechitza, which seems to be like a baya then, not like as Rav. Tashma, the first raya is from the Mishnah Sef the Sukkah. We're in proof number 1. If someone makes the sukkah between the trees, the ilanis and the trees, now trees are not a naturally made partition. I mean, they're naturally made partition. If you didn't make it to be a partition, define this line, the trees are walls for the sukkah. Share, it's going to be a valid sukkah. So you see, a sukkah that needs mechitzas are going to be valid even though it was nasamel that was made by itself. You see, not like Rava. So the Gemara says, no, hach my skin, and all the first 3 are going to be rejected with the same rejection. What do you mean? The tree was planted to be a wall. So therefore, it was made to be as a wall. Says, if that's the case, then Pshita obviously is a bona fide wall. What would be the chiddush of that Mishnah? Says, what would you say? You should make it clear that maybe people might come to use the tree on Yom Tov, and they might come to climb on it and tear off from it, which the gzera of ever using a tree. So we would think that it wouldn't be valid to have the walls made out of a tree. Kamashma, that's what we come and tell you that no, that's not a problem, but the chiddush is not in the tree itself. Of course the tree is going to be a wall, because you planted it to be a wall. and it was not difficult on, so to speak, Rabba, who we think is having this machlekes over here regarding mechitza nasmila. It wasn't nasmila. You went and made the tree to be a wall. Moses Tashmat being another raya from a Bryce in the second paragraph that we talk about regarding what's called the pasi birois, regarding the walls surrounding a pit. Hayisham Elon, if let's say over there was a tree, a geder or a wall, a chitzas hakonim, or a chitzas from the word of mechitzas, where you have planted over there the reeds that are connected to the ground that are like in the order of a partition. So all these things that we described, says the Bryce, as we'll see in the second paragraph, need the mishum diyuman. It's qualified like a diyuman. The second paragraph explained the word diyuman is a composition of two words. Diyu, amud. Diyu means two, and amud is a pole, which means to say, as some Rashis have this picture, that you have one pillar that looks like two, because it's made like a gutter, which is that one side is going, one of its walls is going to the south, and one's going towards the east. And you do those four diyundin to the four corners, so therefore that ends up being that every mechitza has two amas. One amma going one direction, one amma going the other direction, like the pictures of Rashi have, as we'll talk about in the second paragraph. When did they have this leniency of the yumdin? But be that as it may, what's one of the cases over here? Is a tree. You're saying the tree's going to function like a mechitza, like a diyuman. If the tree's in the corner and you could square it out and you could have an amma one way and amma another way. So you see that even though it's nasim left, it can be valid as a mechitza. So for proof number two, whether it be the tree or the case of the reeds, what are we talking about? You went and you made it to be like that. Says so again, what's the chiddush in that price? And then if you went and you planted it to be that, what's the chiddush? Says a different halacha. Chitzas hakonim regarding the partition of the reeds. Kono, when you have one reed and another reed, even though it's pachas mashlesh tvachim, even though it's less than 3 tvachim one from the other, so we're going to consider it as love. The chiddush is, however, that will consider as the human. Like we'll see in the second paragraph, that Abai asked him, Rabbi, what's the halacha in that case? And he says it is good. And that itself is a chiddush that you could go ahead and consider that as a human, even though it's not connected, as long as within 3 tvachim one from the other. That's the chiddush. But the chiddush is not the fact that it's going to be valid, even though it wasn't planted to be that, and it just happened to be there, a partition of reeds that's growing in the ground. No, that is because it was actually made to be like that, because it wasn't nas me'elav, it was not difficult enough. So Moshe Toshmatzving arrived from the third proof. A Bryce who says, Elon hanesach ha'la'aretz, a tree that's covering over the ground, which means to say that the branches are very long branches that are literally still hanging down very close to the ground. Now, means to say that the tip of the branches are less than 3 tvachim from the ground. Now, but however, the trunk of the tree, where it's connected to the ground, is 10 tvachim high. So it is a 10 tvachim high partition. It's just that the branches almost like it's like a house, it's like a canopy, because the branches are so long that they're hanging down. So says the Bryce, in the branches are not more than 3 tvachim from the ground. So you're allowed to actually carry beneath the tree. It's like a partition, because it's 10 tvachim high and the branches are coming down and it's closing off the area because less than 3 tvachim from the ground. You see that even though it's mechitza nasim, a tree just happens to be there and it wasn't made to be mechitza, you see it'll function as mechitza, not like rubber. So what we're talking about is this was planted to be a canopy. That's what it was made for. So if that's the case, then you should be able to carry the whole area. Meaning, as the Gemara explains the question, when the Rabbi Shloimy says, but you're not allowed to carry, if let's say the perimeter of that area was more than 2 sa, which is like the area of the courtyard of the Mishkan, then you're not allowed to carry. Ella base aside, all you're allowed to carry is an area of 2 sa, which that's the measurement that the Chacham gave for any enclosed area that is fixed but not fixed, meaning it's somewhere in the middle. Like for example, you have a partition that doesn't have shasi area, it doesn't have the longitudinal and latitudinal crossing, like a crisscross, as we'll see in this parak on the next Daf in the Zion of a base. Or let's say you enclose an area but not for dwelling purposes, like a park or a garden or things like that. We'll see in the second parak in the Chaldam and out, where it's an enclosed area, but it's not really like a regular Rishus HaYachid. So there we said that you're limited up to 2 sa. So here also, if this tree was just planted happens to be mechitza, was planted by itself, so we could understand that since it was not made to be a dwelling area, so we would understand why the Rabbanu had given a shiur that you're limited to an area of 2 sa. But if it's like you're coming to explain that it was planted for this, so there's a Rabbanu fight mechitzas, it was like you're saying not to lekach, so why you limit up to Beisazam? You should be able to carry no matter how big the area is. It's a regular mechitza. Says Gemara, you're right, but it's for a different reason why we limit up to 2 sa. Because this dwelling, this domain under the tree, it's a dwelling that's made for the airspace. In other words, yes, it was planted to be a mechitza, and it's a area that is for dwelling, where they wanted to be able to use the area beneath it. But this dwelling is not made to really live inside of it. It's almost like a bungalow in the Catskills, where it's like you're not really meant to live in it. You know, they say that summer homes, they miss the boat. It's so decrepit or whatever, so that you'll go outside. It's not really that idea, but I'm saying, but here also it's for the airspace beyond it, because those who would be the Shomer Hasadus, they would watch in the fields, so they need an area that can protect them, let's say, from the rain and from the elements. But the whole idea is just to protect them from the sun. But really, the main thing is for the airspace beyond it. Any dwelling, any domain that's its primary utility is for the airspace beyond it. Carrying that elevates society only if it's too slow. As the Bryce teaches in the second paragraph of Beis Hamikdash, did any airspace that its primary domain is for domain, meaning is to live inside, let's say, some type of enclosing your backyard, a front yard, even if it's 10 cord, then it can be permitted. But any dirish which is like, for example, what's called burgan and shabasadis, which are these little huts in the fields where their watchmen are there. Although it's to be inside, but really it's for the outside area. He wants to see what's going on outside. That's limited up to 2 saw, but more than 2 saw it's going to be forbidden because it's not considered quote unquote a dira, because he just has to be there. But really it's for the area beyond, it's just to protect him from the elements. So too with a tree, even though the tree was made for a dira, it's still a dira shekashmish la'av. It's not really like a regular domain, it's for the area beyond it, and therefore that's why you limit up to 2 saw. And therefore again, that's also not a question on Rava. But the Gemara says one final question that will reject what we had thought in the Havamina. Toshima, learn the Bryce. Shabbos Betil. If let's say Shabbos started and somebody was in a mound, and that's where he acquired his Shabbos residence, because wherever you are when Shabbos is starting, that considers your Shabbos residence. So if it's Shul Gavaya Asara, if it's 10 Tvachim high, so then we say interesting halacha known as good asik. Good asik is, let's say you're on the mound, it's 10 Tvachim high, and it's surrounding an area, so we consider the walls of the mountain all around as if they're extending upward virtual walls. Imagine the towers, the twin towers, you have the red, you see the lights going up. So that's exactly what it would be considered when you're on this mountain, and it's like as if he's surrounded with walls, because he's on that height which have walls. Now, if it's if it's from Dalet Amas until 2 saw, and we'll see what the halacha is going to be. So too, b'chem beneka. Same thing is by a cleft. Let's say one of the clefts in a huge rock, I mean to say like in these mountains. Shu amak asar, which is 10 tvachim deep. V'ma'arba amas v'ad beis and it's from 4 amas until 2 saw. Or the same thing is v'kama katsura. Let's say he's in the harvested crop. V'shiboilas makibas, he has all the stalks surrounding him, like in these corn mazes. Like you could have an area cleaned out, and you could have all around that was not yet harvested, and these stalks are 10 tvachim high. So regarding all these cases we described, the halach is mahalachas kula b'chutzal alpayim amma. You're allowed to go in that whole area that you were when Shabbos started, up until an area of whatever it is, of 2 saw, and even beyond it, because that's the Shabbos residence, and then beyond it you could go 2,000 amma. Now the reason for that is because since he started Shabbos in the airspace of these walls, they became quote unquote his house. So his house is like Dalet Amas. So therefore he's allowed to go that whole area, and then from beyond that, on Shabbos, your tchum is 2,000 amas beyond your house. Now, if let's say, however, the area that he was in, let's say the cleft of the rock, or let's say in that corn maze, whatever it is, that it would have been more than 2 saw, his walls wouldn't help him, because this is an enclosure that wasn't made for dwelling purposes, that wouldn't help more than 2 saw. Now, the reason why we pick from Dalet Amas is because it would be less than Dalet Amas, that the area that's enclosed in, it wouldn't be what's effective to say Ma'alach as Kula, because what does that mean? Even without these walls, a person's allowed to go his Dalet Amas besides the 2,000 amas, as the Gemara says later on, the Minal for the base. But one thing is that we see from over here is that obviously it's not like Rava, because these are things that were made by themselves, and you're considering them as mechitzas. The stalks or the mountain, whatever it is, these things were made by themselves, and therefore you see not like Rava, because you see that we're considering them as mechitzas, that he could consider them as his house. Says they say no. Like we said, rejecting all the first 3 proofs. That he had made them initially to be like that. When he planted the corn maze, all those stalks, he made it to be that it's going to be a mechitza. But then bishlam and come. I understand. Let's say the case of the stalks, that where you could say that it was planted to be the lechayai. That's very well. And tell the naka, but the other cases of the mound or the cleft. Michael, remember, what are you going to say? Those are things from Sheish Neverashis. Those are not things that you planted. How could you say over there that they're going to function as mechitzas and they're not smilal? They made them themselves, and Rabbi says if it was made by itself, it's not going to function.
Can he just designate it as morning?
No, because that was what we said the whole machlekes was. The whole machlekes was samchina. We said they were lying.
The Erev Shabbos.
Yeah, we're talking about Erev Shabbos. They were lying on it. The whole machlekes we started off. The Amma was saying that the whole machlekes by a lechi or mechitz was you were lying on it. Question: but did you make it for that purpose? Abai says, since you, even though you didn't make it, since you were relying on it, it's going to be good. Abai says, no, you didn't make it to be that. It's not going to work. So Elrad, the Gemara rejects and says, you're right. The mechitzas, by partitions, kulam no one's going to disagree to having mechitzas. As we just brought the final raya, everything agrees that it's going to function as a partition, even though you didn't make it, as long as it is a partition. Keep leaking, the Hamachlekes was, as we started off, it was only Belechi, by cycles. And the Gemara explains, what is it that they're disagreeing about? Abai goes according to his reasoning. The Amma that he says, and we've had this machlekes previously, lechi, what does it function as? What does the cycle function? So Abai holds mishum mechitza. It's like a partition. Oh, mechitza sumala. What did we just finish saying? A partition that is there just by itself, havi mechitza is considered mechitza. So therefore, lechi and asmala is also going to be considered as a lechi because it functions as mechitza. But Rabbi goes according to his reasoning. The Amma that he says lechi mishum heker. He says a lechi is the function like a reminder. So if you went and you made it yourself, that's a reminder. Below, if you didn't make it, even though you were relying on it, but you didn't make it, so it's not such a valid hecker, and therefore that's where it's not going to function. It comes down to the principle, what does a lechi function as? It doesn't function as a mechitza, as a hecker. Now, regarding the new understanding that they're only disagreeing regarding the lechi, so the Gemara says, Tashma, it's being a raya. The Gemara brings two rayas to prove, like Abaya, the lechi, and Me'ilam have a lechi. That even though it's there by itself, it's going to be valid lechi. First brisa says, Avnei Geder, if the stones of a wall, hayetzis min hageder, are coming out of the wall, one higher than the other, like you see in this picture. So if it's muvdalas amazu, if the stones are less, it's separated from each other. Pachs mishleish, less than 3 tefachim one from the other. So in tzarich lechi acher, you don't have to have another lechi. This itself will function as the side post. Shleish, if there's a larger gap between them than of 3 tefachim. So lechi acher, then you need to have another lechi. Again, we don't view it as a contiguous lechi because it's a gap of more than 3 tefachim. Well, here we see now like Rava, because this was just left over from construction, and we see that we could line it as a lechi, even though it's a lechi or oimen me'el now. So it's not true. It was built to be like that, to be as the lechi. So that's the case. The pshita obviously it's going to work. So no, you say that this was actually only left over from the construction of, let's say, they're going to want to build a new wall. So a lot of times you see by different structures that they leave and they put this like piece like over there where the chandeliers are supposed to be. They leave like a plastic piece over there. Why do they do that? Because they're thinking in the future that maybe one day they're going to want to do adding on something. So here also, maybe they're going to want to add on the wall. Now it's going to be very difficult to go ahead and make a new wall if you don't leave over something to be able to connect, almost like Lego from the other ones. That's what they do because you're not going to be able to put on a new wall to the old wall. So they put on those bricks. So you would think to say that maybe it's not going to function as a hacker, it's not going to work because it was made for that. Kamashma, it's come to say that no, that even though it's it's going to be valid, but it was made to be like meaning not it was made to be to function as that purpose, and therefore that's what's going to work. It's not difficult on the Rav. It wasn't a lechi oimen. It was actually made to be as a lechi. They just left the gap, but as long as the gap is less than 3 tefachim, it's going to function as a lechi. So Gemara says Tashma. Like we said, perhaps they were built for the purpose of a lechi. Oh, it looks like it was left to add more bricks later, and that's why you thought it wouldn't work. It's still a proper reminder because it was left for that purpose. Gemara says Tashma to bring another raya like Abai, the Tanya Reb Chia taught a brisa, which we mentioned in the previous Daf. Kaisel wall should see the echad kanas mechaver. If one part of the wall is indented more than the other side. So actually, this picture probably is not. These pictures are not precise. It's only showing you actually one of the cases. But the cases are whether if it's visible from the outside, but it's equal from the inside, meaning you only see from the outside, but inside you don't. Whether you see from the inside, but you don't see from the outside. Because actually, both of these you really see from the. Okay, it depends on the Rishonim. But basically, you want to be in one case that if you're in the inside you see it, the other case is in your outside you see it. Either way, says Reb Chia, nida mishum lechi. It's going to qualify like a lechi, and that's what we said in the previous stuff. Either one is going to work. But one thing is we see that this was just the way the construction was. It wasn't meant to be as a lechi. And still you see that's going to function as a lechi. You see lechi oimen me'el is going to be a lechi. This just is the way the construction was, the way the zoning or whatever was that the walls were. Says the Gemara, no, hachinami here also, it actually was built for the purpose of being a lechi. So what's the chiddush? Then it was regular lechi. The chiddush is near the chiddush is to say that even though you only see it from the outside, you don't see it from the inside. Which again, that was a machlekes we had in Daf Testament days. That is the chiddush to tell us, not that the lechi is a lechi. We know it's a lechi. The chiddush is that it's, even though it's a lechi that you only see from the outside, not from the inside, that still that's going to be considered as a valid lechi. But it was made to be as a lechi, and therefore it's not difficult on Rav. Then the Gemara says one final proof which does support and prove like Abaye. Toshma, let's bring it right. Not from a brayso, but from an amloyer. The Rav Rabbi Yosef Bahumava, from a story. Rav was sitting in a certain alleyway. Rabbi Yosef Ravuna was sitting in front of Rav. Amalei l'shamei, Rav said to his attendant, to the Heizbucher, says, Zil Eisel Kuzdim, go bring me a jug of water. Adasa, till he came back, Nofal Lechia, the lechi, the side post fell down. So he showed him with his hands to stop, because you can't carry anymore. It's not a valid moment anymore. So they stopped in this place. So Amalei Ravuna, the student of Rav Huna said to him, doesn't the master hold lismach adikla, to rely on the tree? Meaning, as this picture shows, although the lechi fell down, but there was a tree that was actually right there by the entryway of the mother. Don't you agree that this should be as a valid lechi? So Rav said, Damiheim Rabban, this rabbi could be compared to Commandale Parsha and Shishmai. Like no one ever explained to them how to learn. Did we rely on this tree from before Shabbos? No one holds, as we explained at the top of this Amid, that you didn't rely on it at all, that's going to function as a lechi. Says the Gemara, this is the proof. Time ago, it sounds like because you didn't rely on it, or something you relied on it, have a lechi, would function as a lechi. So you see, that law is like a baya, that even though it wasn't planted for it, but if you relied on it, it would be valid as a lechi. So the Gemara tries to say the following answer, which is like in the way of a question. Lema, maybe let's say that actually a baya Rava, not like we start off the Amid, but that maybe that their machlekes is when you did not rely on it from before Shabbos. Meaning Abaye who says it's permitted is even if you did not rely on it from before Shabbos. And then actually this incident with Rab would be difficult on Abaye because we see Rab did not rely on the tree and therefore it's not going to be valid. Now the problem is we know halach is like Abaye by lechi or if it was there by itself that we do rule like him. So, but it would sound like hasamchina if we did rely on the tree. Have a lechi would be a lechi, and therefore maybe it's difficult on Abaye and not difficult on Rava, because actually that's like Rava who holds that if you would rely on it, then it would be considered as a lechi. Seriously, most says you can't entertain to say this. And most definitely, the machlekes is when you're relying on it from before Shabbos. If you did not rely on it, everyone's going to hold it's not going to be a lechi. Like this story with the tree of Rav, which he did not. All agree that if he did not, that when you didn't rely on it, it's not going to be valid. And how do we know this? How do we know that that's the case? From the following story, because Ahu Barka, we could prove the machlekes of Rav was only when you rely on it, because there was a certain porch, the Hava Bei Bar Chavu, that was by the house of Bar Chavu, which there was a pillar that was supporting the porch that was standing by the opening of a mother. So if you can imagine, like the pillars, a lot of times they make open, like it's that porch was being held up by a pillar. That's maybe similar to what we have outside over here. That a pliga ba Abaye Rabba Kulishnei. That Abaye Rabba the machlekes was all their years regarding does that qualify? Abaye said you're allowed to go ahead and rely on that pillar by the opening of the mavit, which is holding up a porch, to be considered as a lechi for the mavit. And Rabba said it's going to be forbidden. So obviously you see that the machlekes was when you rely on it. Because all their years obviously was that we knew about it from before Shabbos. So it's b'samchina l'la. And still Rabbi says it's not going to be valid. And Abaye was saying in that case it's going to be valid. So that's what Rashi points out, that this is actually one of the 6 cases that we rule like Abaye. Usually machlekes Abaye and Rabbi rule like Rabbi, except like everyone knows from Eilim and Tziyas that by Yal Kigam, what's one of the Yal Kigam? The Lamed, which is Lechi Oim Me'aleha, if the signpost just happens to be there by itself, you didn't make it, you're relying on it, that's where we're going to say it is machlekes Abaye. Abaye says it's going to be about lechi, and that's what being a raya from this story of Rav that yes, that the halacha is going to be that only because they didn't rely on it from before Shabbos, but had they relied on it, it would have been a valid lechi, clearly supporting Abaye like his halachic of the lechi elav. That's the machlekes was only when if they did rely on it, and that's where we rule like Abaye. To the halacha, the next mishnah continue on this theme of these last mishnayos regarding the validation of a mother with a lechi, what qualifies as a lechi as a side post. Says the Mishnah, But you can make a side post out of anything. Even a living creature could function as a lechi. But Rameir says that's forbidden. You cannot use a living creature as a side post. Another machlekes is, Tanakama says that if, let's say, you make a goylo, which is the cover of the coffin that Rashi understands for a grave, so that cover is going to have the tumah of oil, like the mess itself. Even if you take the cover of the coffin off, as the Bryce says in Chol Navayin Beis, the pasuk says Kol Shriga Pnei Asad, the you touch on the surface of the field includes the goylo b'dayfik, which according to Rashi is the cover of the coffin and the side of the coffin. That's going to have the same halacha of the tumah itself, of the mess. So on that says the Tanakama, a living creature could be used to cover, which Tracy finds that bizarre, and if it disagrees with Rashi elsewhere. But according to Rashi, that's what it is. You could use a living creature as the cover, and that will have the halacha of the goyim. However, it's get into the base. Meir Mitar. Meir, however, says that no, it's not going to have the tumah of a goyim. And the reason for Meir is explaining himself to Sukkah because he holds that any mechitza, any partition that has a living spirit inside of it, it's not going to be considered as mechitza. So therefore, it's not going to be considered as a lechi because it can't be mechitza. And neither could it be a cover of a coffin that has a heart beating inside of it. That's not considered as a mechitza. And the third case is v'chaysim of gitei nashim. The third case that we have a disagreement regarding living things is the Tanakama holds you could write a divorce document on a living creature and give it to the wife, pass on the horse. Basically, the place of Yisrael says no, it's invalid. You can't write a get on a living creature. Now, Tanya learned a brayso similar to like the halacha of the Mishnah. We have Rameir Eimer, who is quoted in the Mishnah. He says, he says, anything that has a living spirit. You cannot make it like from a sukkah, can't make it a wall for a sukkah. As he says in our Mishnah, you can't make it a side post for the alleyway. You cannot make it, as we'll see in the second paragraph, going to be side post of the pit. Neither could you make it a covering for a grave. Which means to say, as Rashi says, if you make it a cover for a grave, it's not going to have the halachic status of a goylu on it. Which the goylu is the cover of that you put on top of the dead person. It's not going to have that status to have that tone. Now, as he said in our Mishnah 2, he says, also if it's a living creature, you cannot write a divorce document on it. You aren't permitted to any person and hand it a living creature, you cannot do that. So now another more goes to explain this machlik is regarding the halacha of a get, if you can write on a living creature or not. It says, what's the reason basically? Because the time you learn the Brisa, it says a pasuk in the Varim, b'chasiv law sefer creases. You're going to write for the woman a document of severance. Now, the word sefer sounds like it's talking about parchment. And Rashi brings a raya from pasuk in Yirmiyah where it says, "Ani kaisav ala sefer b'jay," and then it's called a Megillah, where Achi Sarf HaMelech Es Megillah. So you see, obviously, the word sefer is referring to a scroll. So it's a sefer, an actual book, a parchment. So it says the Bryce, I would only know a sefer itself. Minayin l'Rab is called Dava. How do you know that you can write a get on anything? Tamalim, it says in the pasuk b'chasav law that you write for her. It doesn't say it's writing, whatever it is, whatever you write. So why does it say sefer? You can write on anything. I'll tell you, ma sefer, you can write on anything, but it has to at least be comparable to a piece of parchment. Ma sefer just like a sefer is something that's not living, and it doesn't. It's not a food item. I've called also Davishem Beruchem has to be something that's not a living spirit. Beinoichel is not a food item, and that's where you can write on anything, but it cannot be a living creature. That's what Rabbi clearly knows his halacha. It says what do? They say you're allowed to write again even on the living creature. So they say like this: Miksiv bas sefer. Does it say that you write her bas sefer? It hadn't written because of Lacrease's bas sefer, write for a seventh in a sefer. I would have said in a sefer means to say a Megillah. But now that it says sefer ksiv, it just says sefer. You know what the word sefer means? Sefer could also mean sipur. L'svir's drum ba'amudas. It just comes to tell us the story. Meaning, it's almost like it said v'chasam divrei creases. The word sefer creases means like the word of sipur, that you should write from the words of sephers. But it doesn't tell you where you have to write it, and therefore it would sound like you could write on whatever you want to write it, even on living creature. It says Rabbanan, Hai v'chasam my darshavei. And according to Rabbanan, what do they expound from the word v'chasam? In other words, since you tell me that the word sefer doesn't really mean a piece of parchment, so it doesn't tell you that you have to write on parchment, and then to include from v'chasam to say that you could go ahead and write on anything, it could have just said, but nasan la sefer creases. Why say v'chasam la? You don't have to include v'chasam any ksiva. You didn't tell me we have to write anyway. So the Gemara, who bebayla, they need it for a different limud. The reason why it says v'chasam la by creases is b'ksiva miskareshin. She gets divorced with writing. Be'en miskareshin because you cannot divorce a woman with money. In other words, if you give her money, you say, look, do me a favor. We're done. We're over. And give her the money as you get, that's not going to be valid. Now, why would you think that would work? So you would have thought to say, Since the pasuk compares getting married to getting divorced, because right after it talks about creases, the next pasuk says she can get married to another man. These women, they don't stay single too long. She can get married to someone else. Now that's kedusha. So you would say just like getting married is with money, and the Gemara knows that in the beginning of the second kedusha opens up the base. We know kicha from stay Ephraim, where it says that it says he's going to take a woman. That word kicha Beyikach also says by Ephraim, when Abraham Avinu bought the field from Ephraim, which that's with money, so too we know getting engaged is with money. So you would think to say, okay, getting divorced also with money. Kamash Malan, that's what coming to tell you that no, that it's only the chas of law, you can only get divorced with a writing and not with a money. But it's not telling you where to write it because it doesn't tell us where it has to be written. Now, Rabbi Shloimy, now the Gemara goes back to Rabbi Shloimy and says that, wait, according to him, Sahai Svarmanoli, where does he know this logic that it doesn't help to divorce with money? Because he doesn't know it from a chassid law, because he already used the chassid law to tell you that you could write it on anything, not just on the sefer. So it's going nafkalemi sefer creases. He learns it out from a different context. From the fact that it says creases near the word sefer, it says sefer creases, which tells you sefer karsa, only a sefer is going to sever their relation, but nothing else, meaning money, that's not going to sever the relation. So not from the word b'chasavla, because b'chasavla is coming to include you can write in anything, rather from the word sefer creases, that the sefer does the severance and nothing else. Rabbanan says, and what do they do with this sefer creases? Or high sefer creases this because they already know that the severance has to be from b'chasavla and not from money. So what do they do with the word sefer creases? High sefer creases, maybe we need for a different teaching. It has to be something that severs between him and her. In other words, you cannot have any stipulation in the divorce document that connects them, that binds them. Because if you have a stipulation, we're still related. Like, you know, the people that get divorced and they still have all the rights, the visitation rights and everything, that now they have more relationship than when they were before they got divorced. Because now they're calling, when can I come over, and when can I do, when can I see the kids, and who's coming to. So it can't be something that is binding. It has to be a total severance. What is that referring to? Like time like learn the Brisa. This is your divorce document. On the condition you don't drink wine anymore. This is what broke up our relationship. No more. You're getting divorced only if you don't drink wine. Your father, forget it. We get divorced, you can never go to your father ever again. So that's it depends. If when he made the stipulation, he made it forever, it's a crisis. It's not a severance, because now for the rest of her life, she's bound to her ex-husband. Because of him, she can't drink wine, she can't go to her father's household. So that stipulation, it continues forever. That's not a severance. But Kol Shleishim Yom, let's say he says, yeah, only for the next 30 days you can't drink wine, you can't go to your father. Hariz decreases, then as Rashi actually explains, it's going to be an immediate severance, because those are words of severance, because at the end of the 30 days, she can be permitted to another man. So even right now, it's a get. The stipulation will go on for 30 days, but she can actually get remarried right now, because it is a crisis. It is a severance, because there is an expiration to that Tanai, and that's the halacha that they're learning out the Rabbanah from Sefer Krisis to say has to be a book of severance. You have to have it totally separated, not being bound together with a condition.
He says 30 years.
Yeah, as long as it's not forever.
So that's he's forever. He tells
you mean to say if he says 300 years?
Yes.
It probably would be La'ilam, but probably that's a good shayla. So Rabbi Shloimy, what does he do? How does he know this teaching? So the Gemara Nafkali Mekaris Krisis. He learns it out from. It doesn't say because of a sefer karis. It says because of a sefer krisus. So you can learn two things from that word, sefer karisa, and also that has to be a book of severance that's not stipulated. But Rabban and krisis like darshan, they don't expound that you could have said karis instead you write the word krisis, because the word krisis is more phonetically appropriate, and therefore they don't learn that. But again, that's the whole hishtalshlis of the limud of how do you know that regarding gitei nashim, could you write a get on a living creature or can you not? That was what the Gemara went through the whole. Back and forth. Well, if they learn it from there, what do you learn from there? What do you learn from there? And then going until they get to Karis Krisis Leidashi, that's where it ends up toying together the bow, because you always wonder where's it going to end. They have to learn something. Okay, that's where, because you expand another thing in the word Krisus, because they could have said the word cut. Continue with the next Mishnah.
300 years is a guzmas.
What?
300 is a guzmas, so 300 years is a
guzmas. Oh, you mean guzmas, yeah. We continue with the next Mishnah, which continues on interesting types of partitions and certain exemptions in the laws of mechitzas to be a rishus that you can carry on Shabbos. The Gemara says shiur regarding a caravan. Shachantzim b'bikah, meaning they're traveling somewhere and they're resting out for Shabbos in an open field. Now, what they did was v'kifu kli behema. They surrounded themselves with the vessels of the animals, and now they made a partition all around where they're staying for Shabbos. So Allah is matat l'b'teicha. They're allowed to go ahead and carry inside the area on Shabbos, provided that there's three conditions. As long as they made out of, let's say, all these saddlebags and all these animals, they made a partition 10 tefachim high. Also, the second condition is, you can't have more breaches than built part, meaning even the breaches are small breaches, less than 10 amas. You can't have, however, that the breached area should be more than the total walls of the area. Additionally, the third stipulation is, in general, kol pirza shika eser amas, any breach that's at least 10 amas, that's muteris, meaning up until 10 amas. Memne shika pesach, because that's considered like an opening. And again, you also have to have that oimen meruba, that the more closed off than the breach. But even if you have more than oimen meruba, but the opening can't be more than 10 amas. Yes, if there's more than 10 amas, it can be forbidden, even if you have one breach. Will make the whole surrounded area prohibited, even if it's more closed than open, as Gemara is going to explain from a brayso, because once you have an opening more than 10 amas, it's considered breach. It's not considered as a valid closure. Now, relating to the halacha of the Mishnah, which we'll see actually, that's going to be a question on one of these mandamim from our Mishnah. We learned paritz killing. In our Mishnah, we spoke about paritz meruba is a problem. If you have more breach than closed, what happens if you have exactly the amount of breach as the amount of closed area, and the whole enclosed area was made like that. So you have 50-50 a breach, and 50-50 meaning 50 breach and 50 open. So what's the law? Rav Papa Amamot, he says that's okay. Rav Hundred says a problem. So the Gemara explains each one where they're coming from. Rav Papa Amamot says it's okay because this is exactly what Hashem said to Moshe, because as we said in the beginning of the paragraph of Dalet, we said that mechitzas halacha Moshe Sinai. So whatever we know about partitions is what a tradition that Hashem said to Moshe, and he passed it on to us. So you know what Hashem said to Moshe? Loy tifritz ruba. Don't have most of it breached. That means to say, but if it's 50-50, it's gonna be okay. But Rabbi Shloimy says, "I know it's a problem because you know what Hashem said to Moshe? God the ruba, close off most of it, which means that if it's not most of it closed off, so then 50-50 is going to be a problem." Now the problem is the Gemara brings a raya. It's not from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, as we had said, one of the three criterion for this caravan was you shouldn't have more breached area than built area. So it sounds like hakibin, but if it's exactly the same amount, now that would be mutter, that would be admitted. So we see that not like the halacha of Rabbi Yeshua, he says usher. You see from our Mishnah that it would be okay as long as not more. If it's 50-50, that it would be okay. So therefore, says the Gemara that no, like tema, don't say hakabinyan mutter. Don't say that if it's like the same amount, that's going to be permitted. Rather say in binyan yes ala pirza mutter. No, if you have more structure, that's the inference. If the structure is more than the breach, then mutter is going to be permitted. Gemara says, wait, how can you say that? But if you tell me that it's the same amount as built as breach, us is going to be forbidden. So if that's the case, listening, then you should have said, lo you pirtzis kabinyan. Don't let the breached areas be like the built area. Why saying that? Don't let it be more. This is more kasha. That's definitely a difficulty. It's not a refutation because you could say that it's just saying the problem, but ultimately it is a difficulty on Rav Hundred Yeshua, who says that the usher, according to him, it shouldn't have said that it's more. It should have said that it's the same amount. Now the Gemara brings Tashma, a different right from Mishnah Sefta Sukkah. Mishnah says, if someone covers over his sukkah with spits, or like a spit, like you use in the nice shish kebab, or the legs of the bed, which both of those are invalid to be used as schach because they're vessels. In the Makabel Tumah, as the Mishnah teaches, anything that's Makabel Tumah, you cannot use as schach. Now, if you have space between those spits or between those metal pieces, the amount of those things itself, so that you could put in kosher schach, then that's going to be a kosher sukkah. So you see, when the breached area is the same as the closed area, it's going to be permitted because over here, you see the same amount of kosher schach is going to be as the indal schach. It's going to be permitted. So that's also difficult. Contrary to Yeshua, you see, he says that paritz kaimet is possible. Here you see it's going to be kosher. Says, what are you talking about? We're talking about where the gap that you had made between the spits is not just the same exact amount that you could put kosher schach, let's say bamboo. You're leaving enough space that is berevach, what's called with ease. You can be able to put it in and out. It's not exact. So therefore it's not Aymed Kaparetz, Paretz Ka'aymed, it's actually Aymed Merubal Paretz, because you can have more space to be able to put it in. So the Gemara says, what do you mean by Efshel Tzamtzah? But you could be exact. What Rashi explained, the Gemara's question was that the Gemara thinks that when the Gemara had answered the Nichnas V'Yetzer, that it's easy to come in and go out, the way you're answering is that whenever it's Kamaisan, whenever you're leaving the amount that's exactly the same amount, it means to say that you're going to be leaving a little more because you cannot be exact. So that's what the Gemara was asking. What do you mean you could be precise and you could make it exactly that it shouldn't be any more than how much the spits or the leg posts are, and because that's what it says Kamaisan. So you could be exact. The Gemara says you're right. You could be. He says Bavamad. Our Mishnah is talking about over the in Sukkah where you weren't exact. You rather left a little bit more space, more than the spits. And when we said Kamaisan, it actually meant like the shear of the spits by Benichnas V'yetzi, that it could come easy and go out. So therefore it's really going to be Oymin Meruba a la parts. Rambam actually, he gives a different interpretation. He says, Imhayu, if the spits were in the Sun and Erev, if they were in the going in the longitudinal, so then Nisni Shasi, then you put that, that's the actual latitude, right? Latitude, right to left, and longitudinal. So if you put it latitudinal, then this, what? Lengthwise, well, it depends what the length is, the width-wise, whatever. Erev is goes from right to left, let's say. And then Nisni Shasi, so then you put it going in the warp, which is basically going north to south. Or Shasi, if let's say one was north to south, Nisni, then you put the kosher schach, Erev, you'll put it from east to west. But basically means to say is even if you didn't leave room in the gap, more than the actual where the non-kosher schach is, it's going to be kosher because you're going to have to be putting on more kosher schach, because since you're putting it crisscross, so it cannot stand unless if it's on the other poles. So therefore, it's going to have to be a little bit longer because it has to. So you're covering the whole area. You're putting the schach one way this way, and then you're putting it on top of this way. So even though you're putting the same amount, it's going to be a little bit longer because it has to stay on the schach. So therefore, that's what's going to be valid. Tashma, the Gemara brings one final raya, shiur shechan to the bika, similar to the case of our Mishnah. If you have a caravan that was dwelling for Shabbos in the valley, now they surrounded themselves with camels, with cuppers, with the saddles, with the kintab, with the zaymanal, with cushions. Those are the blankets that they put beneath the saddle of the camel, not to injure the camel, or b'shlifen, which are the loads, b'konim, with reeds, b'kerlaches, with the vegetable stalks. So you surrounded the whole area with all these elements. So the halach is metalim, let it carry inside of it. And this is the raya, as long as you don't have between every camel kamaloi gamal, the amount of the camel itself, or ubein ukav la'ukav, as long as you don't have between every saddlebag kamaloi ukav, the same amount as a saddlebag. Ubein avid la'avid kamaloi avid, or between every cushion the size of another cushion, meaning you cannot have what? Paretz ka'imid. You see the paretz ka'imid is a problem, which is like Eruvin Yeshua, not like the other opinion. You see paretz ka'imid is a problem because you can't have that the same amount of gap. So both of them, Eruvin Yeshua and Papa, from their difficulties, they both have the answer. No, it's not exactly 50-50. It's actually the extra wiggle room between the animals, and if it's actually more than 50, that's paretz, and therefore that's what's going to be invalid. But paretz ka'imid itself actually would be valid. So therefore there's no right. The Gemara continues in the next step, continue to discuss this. Halacha, if paretz ka'imid is the problem enough, but we did not reject any opinions as of yet. Some ideas spoke about Eruvin Daf was lechi ha'omen me'el. If it just happened to be there, what's the halacha? Now the Gemara qualified that that's specifically where you had relied on it from before Shabbos. You didn't rely on it for short time in the work. You relied on it, but it was by itself. What's the halacha going to be? So the Gemara initially assumed that the same thing applies by mechitza ha'omen me'ela. What's the halacha going to be? So the Gemara brought a bunch of rayas regarding that. You see, even the mechitza was by itself, it's going to be valid. First one was from a tree. And we see a tree is going to be considered a wall for a sukkah. A tree is may allow, and you see fellas mechitza. So no, you actually planted it to be that. So what's the chiddush? Chiddush is that we're not concerned that you're going to come to use it on Yom Tov, which would be a problem about using a tree on Yom Tov. The second raya was from a tree that functions as a diyumad for the pasei abar. Now, a tree or the mechitza sakanim, all those different things, we just happen to have been there and you see it functions as mechitza. No, you made it to be that. So what's the chiddush then? The chiddush is that by the chitzas kana, as we'll see in the second parak, that even though it's less than gimel tfachim one from the other, but still you would think that it's not going to be valid. That's the chiddush that it's going to be valid, but it's not the chiddush of the tree itself or the chitzas, because it was made to be that. Third raya was again from a tree that covers over an area as long as it's less than 3 tfachim from the ground, it's going to be permitted. Now, how is that considered as a mechitza? A tree is just by itself. So no, it's planted for that. And what's the chiddush? Chiddush is also that we're not, and which is actually the Gemara's question, that says, wait a second, why can't you carry more than 2 sah? You can't, because it's like a dirish, a tashmish la'av, it's meant for the area beyond it, just to be able to be protected from the elements, but not really to dwell over here. It's like a bungalow to be out there, and therefore that's why it's not going to have more than 2 sah. But the ultimate right was, if someone was shavas, betel banaka, in a cleft or in a mound, he's allowed to go 2,000 amma, well, why could that be considered your bias? How is it a mechitza? That's not man-made. It can't be that you ever made it. It's definitely man allowed. The Gemara rejected. You said you're right. By mechitzas, no one's going to hold that it's not. Everyone agrees that it is going to be mechitza. The whole machlekes was by a lechi. Abaya holds a lechi function as mechitza, and we said just before that a mechitza ha'oimin me'alav is going to be considered a mechitza. Therefore, lechi is going to be good. Rabbi says it functions like a hecker. If it's by itself, so then it's not a hecker because it just happens to be there, and even though you're relying on it, it's not going to be a valid reminder. So, but that's why it holds it's not going to be valid. Now that we know that machlekes is only regarding lechi, so the Gemara again tries to bring rayos like Abaya. Because we had the halacha of the avnei geder, the bricks of a wall that's coming out as long as less than 3 tefachim one from the other. You don't need another lechi. Why don't you need another lechi? What do you mean? Obviously, you see that even though it just happened to be there, it's only allowed to be valid lechi. He said, no, you actually made it. You built it initially to be like that. So what's the chiddush? Chiddush is you would have thought that it was only for construction purposes, so that when you need to have for the building, you'd be able to connect a new wall, and if it's not as made as to be a lechi, no, it was made to be a lechi, and if it's going to function as a valid hecker. Second raya was from a Bryce of a Mechia regarding the wall that one side is indented. Whichever way, the inner part of the wall is indented, the outer part, but we see it's going to function as a lechi, that's made by, it just happens to be like that. No, you made it to be like that. So what's the chiddush? Chiddush is the halach of nir b'chutz. Even though you only see on the outside, not on the inside, that's what we learned in the previous Daf test, that's going to function as a lechi. That's the chiddush of that Bryce. But the final raya to Abai was from the story of Rav. Rav said to Rabuna, he says, no, you cannot rely on the tree that just happens to be there when the lechi fell down because we didn't rely on it. Oh, so it sounds like, but if they relied on it, it would be a lechi. You see, like Abaya, that is the right. Which the Gemara says, and don't say that maybe their machlekes of Abaya and Rava was when you don't rely on it. And therefore, actually, the story supports Rava because we find by the porch where Abaya and Rava, all their years they disagreed with it. Now, all the years means to say that they were relying on it. It didn't just happen on Shabbos, they're relying on it. And still, we see Rava is not going to be valid. Abaya says it's going to be valid. It's obviously when Samchin allowed. And still, but it was made by itself. That's the machlekes, and we see from the story of Rav, which is actually what you call the Yal Kagam, that we rule like Abaya, not like Rav, but that's the Lamed of Yal Kagam of Lech Yomim Elav, that we rule like Abaya, that is considered Al Lech. Then we went to the next mission regarding something that has a living spirit. We had 3 machlekes regarding, let's say, an animal. If you could make a lechi out of it, if it's going to have the tumah of a goyel, of a covering of a coffin, and also if you could write a gitei nashim on it. Additionally, a Gemara brought a Bryce of Remeah that you cannot make a wall for a sukkah, and you cannot make it pass on the Bryce. We'll explain the second part what the case is. Now, explaining the halacha of the machlekes of get. So the Gemara says, what's the machlekes? So, do you say that the word sefer means literally, like what's it called, a cloth, like a sefer, and therefore the chas of law is coming to include anything that you could write, but has to be similar to the sefer, which a sefer is not a living thing and it's not oichel? Or do you say that no, the word sefer actually means like sipur, like a story? And the chassid will actually come to teach you that you could only get divorced with a ksiva and not with money. But why? Because you would have thought to say, because since you compare Havayli Yitziyah, you would think you could use money, and therefore we have to tell you that no, it has to be with writing. Whereas Rabbi Shloimy would say, actually, we know that from sefer creases, which the sefer has to separate and not money, which Rabban say, no, it has to be something that separates, which means there cannot be stipulation. Rabbi Shloimy knows that from Karas creases, and Rabban don't learn Karas creases. Again, that's the whole evolution of how they interpret regarding the divorce, if it's going to be from a living creature or it cannot be. The final mission was regarding a caravan in the valley. We said that if they surrounded it with the kli behemoth, they could carry as long as there's one mechitza of 10 tefachim, and also that the breaches shouldn't be more than the building, and also that there shouldn't be any breaches more than 10 amas, because then it's considered a breach and not a pesach. And we had, which opened up the discussion for the next step, a machlekes we have parts kohemet, exact same amount, breach as closed. Now the question is really, what did Hashem teach Moshe Rabbeinu? What's the Messiah? We had a difficulty with the Mandam that says also from our mission. It sounds like only you just can't have parts meruba, but it could be the same amount. And then we had 2 questions which we were rejected, which was an either mando amar. We said if someone covers a sukkah with spits, so if the space between them is exact, it can be kosher. So the Gemara says no, you don't make it exact. You have to leave a little margin, and that's where it's, therefore, that's why it's going to be valid, because you actually have more oimid than ruby, you can have more room for kosher schach. The Gemara asks you could be mitzvah. So the Gemara says either we're talking about weird, but you didn't do it exact, you left over space, or it's talking about that if you did it crisp, then you did a cross, or cross you did a crisp, whatever, you made crisscross, and that's why you're going to have more of the kosher, even though you left exactly the same amount. And the second raya was on the other Manda Amar, where we have a shiur, shamansa. Again, the same case of the Mishnah, you can be top as long as you don't have exactly the same amount of what you have. You see, parts claimant is going to be usher. So the Gemara says no, it's because the breached area is not just kimaloi. It's actually nichnas v'yetzi. You left actually more room to be able to wiggle space that you have. So you actually have parts meruba, that's what's going to be valid. Maybe parts kaima actually would be valid. They can try anytime the host